All right, so this video is Mars through the houses. If you did not see the other video yet, check it out. Link below. It's the Mars through the signs. My suggestion, watch the video for your house and then watch the other video for Mars through the signs. So sometimes you might hear one independent of the other and you might say, I don't really resonate with that, but you have to put it together, right? So I would say start with your Mars in the sign, Mars in Aries, Mars in Virgo, Mars in Leo, whatever. Start with the sign because that's going to be like the most direct, and then start looking at the house meaning and put that together. So this video is a follow-up because we already know Mars is the planet of aggression, dominance. It's linked to sexual impulse. It's linked to impulsivity. It's linked to any area of your life where you act. How do you act? Mars can also bring conflict. So wherever, you see certain, Mars could be where you have conflict. Now, except 12th house, because now we're dealing with unconscious thoughts. And 12th house people can be their own conflict, their inner conflict. So it gets deep. So let's talk about Mars in the first house. So when I talk about Mars through the houses, I'm not linking it specifically to the sign. So here's what I mean. Mars rules the first house. We know the first house is kind of like symbolically kind of like Aries. If you think about the order, right? So second house is Venus, Taurus. But Mars in the first house doesn't mean you are Aries. You get what I'm saying? It's not the same necessarily as Mars and Aries, though you might see some similarities. So for instance, like first house people, the similarity you'll see is like Mars and first house people tend to like to be seen as independent. Okay, they like to be seen as independent. Mars and first house people tend to, when they do something, they want to show what they're capable of. There's a neat and outer confidence, right? The first house, the house of self, of identity, self-actualization. The first house is where, when you have planets in the first house, you are aware, or you're aware of what you want to project. Okay? And you typically show through action what you're good at. So again, that's why I say you would have to probably look at your Mars sign. Why I say Mars in the first house doesn't mean the same as Mars in Aries, because if you're Mars in Pisces, right, you're front and center showing how much you care about the things you do. You're not the type of person that can do things just to do them. They have to matter to you, okay? They have to be a part of the bigger picture. They have to be part of your inner spirit. See what I'm saying? So that's why you have to look at both things to understand your chart. Mars and first house people tend to sometimes, because they want to undertake so much on their own, they can tend to do well in certain areas of their life because they know how to be independent. Even in other areas of their life where things might not be together for the most part, they know how to do what they need to do. They tend to not need a lot of hand holding through life. Now, again, Mars is where we act. So this can be influenced by whatever sign it's in. So if you have Mars and Aries in the first house, this is an active person. They're always showcasing who they are. They're always want to show their confidence or how bold they are or how strong or how whatever they are, right? Whereas, let's say you had Mars and Virgo in the first house. Well, now it's different because now Mars and Virgo wants to make sure things look good. They want to make sure things are right. So your Mars and Virgo person, right? They care a lot about presentation. They care about how things appear. They like to do things the right way. And it usually will be seen. That's seen. The first house is seen by others, not the 12th house, right? So it's seen. But when you put Mars and Virgo there, it's now a different type of Mars where we're now doing things, but we have to think about them first because we care about that perception that others might have, right? We care. And so what we do is impacted by, hey, people notice that I'm good at this. Whereas if you have Mars and Aries, they might say, like, I'm just showing that I know how to do it. Like, I don't really care about the details. I don't really care how it comes out. I'm just doing it. So you do have to look at those different things there. As far as being combative, I think some Mars and first house people, it depends on the sign. To be very honest with you, yes, Mars can bring conflict, but I think you're more likely to see that conflict flare in the third house, where now, this is now verbal. Mars in the first house, I really think it depends more on the sign, how combative the person actually will be. There is a self-involved type of energy with the first house. It just is. And so any Mars in the first house person should definitely, if they are not super, aware or confident in how they present, they should work on that because that energy is there. You have Mars in the first house, you can stand out from just being someone who's able to get things done, or someone who is has confidence. And so if you don't have confidence, that definitely is an area to work on, because once you do that, it's going to shine in every area of your life, because the first house is what others see you. So, but the first house is you decide. It's interesting, right? You decide what you are projecting, because it's the house of you, identity. Second house Mars people, money is always going to be very, very important to them, right? Now remember, Mars is not about the mind or the feeling. It's about what I want or what I want to do. And so Mars in the second house people, they always know what they want to do. They always know what they want to do. They typically are not people that are unclear. Also, remember, the second house is linked to values, right? Your self-value, how you perceive yourself, what's your sense of safety. So Mars, the second house people's sense of safety is always having a plan, always doing something. Now, here's the thing. Mars is not Mercury. So the plan doesn't mean it's well thought out. It means they know what they want to do. So you can see a lot of people sometimes, depending on the other part of the chart, that don't always have concrete goals, right? Or they're always trying something or another. Now, again, especially if you have Mars and Gemini in the second house, that could mean you're always trying something new. So it could be hard to kind of get that grounding down. But the second house Mars person knows that having your own is important. So it's a part of their value, their sense of self-value is having their own, having what they need. And in order to do that, they're constantly trying new things. What do I do? How do I get to this goal? Or how do I get what I need financially, or to feel secure or feel safe, with what I have? So that is what Mars in the second house tends to do. And also, these are people that tend to stick to their values. Because remember, second house is values. It's not just money and possessions. And so there's a boundaries, right? Second house, we're thinking of boundaries, right? That fixed energy of I know what I want, or I know what I am, and I'm not changing that. I know what I have and I know what I need. That energy of the second house. And so when Mars is there, they're really not budging. If you're in a relationship with someone with Mars in the second house, you're going to have to find a way to kind of make things work financially, because they're always going to, that's going to be important to them. They're always going to need that kind of independence in sense of how they feel safe financially, right? Or they don't want you necessarily to take care of them. Now, again, if they have other placements in the chart, maybe, but there's always going to be this restlessness in them to achieve money or resources or security. And so sometimes you might have to speak logically to them if you notice that it's they always have something they're trying to do and it's not really catching grounding, right? It's not grounded in practicality. Now, if they have Mars and Taurus in the second house, that's probably really positive, because now we have some earth energy. So now we're able to have a foundation with what we do. It's able to have longevity, right? But the positive of the Mars in the second house person is this understanding that we can't just sit around and do nothing. So there's probably not going to be a very lazy person. They understand the need, right? Now, again, you have to look at the whole chart, because, you could also have somebody with Mars in the second house. They're all about that, and they might use somebody, right? Or they might over rely on a partner if you have Mars and Libra in the second house. Again, no chart placement is bad, but when you put it certain places, it creates different types of reactions. Mars in the third house of communication, early childhood, siblings, neighborhood. So it's things that are local to us, things that are familiar to us, right? And so with the third house, Mars placement, this person likes to assert what they know. They like to assert what they know, usually verbally, all right? Mars can be conflict. So they can be one, really good when it comes to standing up for somebody else, might stand up for their siblings, things like that. But also Mars can bring conflict. And when we have Mars in the third house, the air house, this can be conflict with words, communication. Okay. If you're not careful with your communication, how can that come across to other people? Is it overbearing? Is it Mars and Sag in the third house, where now we're dominant, but we're indoctrinating you? Whereas if I had Mars and Gemini in the third house, that's an easier flow of energy, because the third house is ruled by Mercury, linked to Gemini. Do you see what I'm saying? So all this stuff matters. And if you're like, wow, this is interesting, but I don't really understand my chart. I do readings. I have a $30 advanced chart reading that I have available. I dropped the price just because everything going on right now. And I give you a video and a full on interpretation video, and I type up your report. I do everything. So yeah. Because all this matters, where it is. Mars in the, is there anything else I want to say about Mars in the third house? I mean, I think these people can be great in debating, arguing. Like when you can use that energy for good. When do you have to be dominant in your communication, right? Like if somebody wants to be a lawyer, or someone has to argue on the behalf of people, or someone wants to advocate for people, having Mars, which is the planet of like dominance, in the third house can mean a really good disposition for being good at getting your point across, at really helping other people see what you're trying to say. Any type of leadership, Mars in the third house, right? Because you're leading, you're able to get people to listen to you because you have that authoritative type of style. Mars, though, in the third house could have meant conflict with siblings, conflict, maybe arguing, fighting. Probably not the most easiest sign with siblings. Like if you had Venus in the third house, you might have a more positive relationship with your siblings, but Mars can bring conflict. So just to keep that in mind. And it doesn't mean it always is. It just might mean growing up, because the third house is a young house, which means it's associated more with like our childhood or early schooling. Yes, as an adult, it's more about the communication. But when we think about childhood, the third house is more those things that we experienced. Okay. Fourth house is home, family, and roots, our background. Fourth house is linked to emotion. So anything that stirs us up emotionally, right? And usually home stirs people up emotionally, right? So, fourth house Mars people, a lot of them, again, Mars always wants to be independent. Anywhere Mars is, it wants to be independent. So Mars in the fourth house probably wants to, in most cases, this person wants to have their own family. They want to settle on their own. They want to see how they're different from their family. It's an independent streak. It's not like Uranus where it's like they are different. Mars is like, I don't have to do it this way, or I don't have to stay here. I'm independent of my family. And so sometimes you'll see Mars in fourth house people kind of have that different type of experience from their family, or in some way they're less dependent. Now, sometimes Mars can take on a lot. So within the family structure, here's what you have. Since the fourth house can be related to our family background, our roots, our memory, usually people with Mars in the fourth house had a dominant member of the family. Now, it could be masculine because remember, Mars is a masculine planet. That's what it's, but it just means anybody that was very dominant in the household. Someone that just kind of had a really dominant, kind of authoritative streak could be if you have your Mars in the fourth house. But also Mars in the fourth house people, sometimes they can take on a lot within the family. Like they feel they have to do these things. Anytime something comes up with their family, even if they don't like their family, even if there's like some type of distance or issue, Mars in the fourth house people kind of usually want to take that on. Especially if you see something like a really strong, like a Mars in Capricorn in the fourth house. They're going to be like, I got to take care of this. I'm going to make sure you're okay. Because that paternal energy of Capricorn, Mars and Pisces, something like that. The fourth house, I want to take it on. Now, depending on what sign you have, that's going to depend how you do that. Because fourth house can be nurture. But when we have Mars there, it's more of a direction. It's not, I'm going to hug you. It's, I know how to fix this. So it depends on what sign your Mars is in, how you're going to try to help the family. Do you get what I'm saying? You might have someone with Mars and Virgo in the fourth house who's always trying to help their family, like be healthier, or they take care of their family, or they might like always be like, seeing if they're okay, checking on them, giving them advice, something like that. Okay. You could have a Mars in Leo, fourth house person who maybe might try to, help you financially, money. So that's what I'm saying. Like that's where you can see the aspects of that. But yes, sometimes there could be conflict somewhere within the family, whether it was you being directly involved or just somebody in the family that causes a lot of conflict, who's really influential or an essential part of the family dynamic. And typically within their own household, they create the Mars person is, kind of the head of the family, regardless of gender. And also, I feel like a lot of Mars and fourth house people, fourth house is related to memory. A lot of fourth house people's memory, if they have Mars, is like about what they did. Like, how some of us will just remember how we felt in a certain situation or what happened. Like Mars and fourth house people, a lot of their stories are always related to how they did something. Because that's how they associate with their memory, because Mars is about action. So they might say, yeah, I was walking down the street and like they'll explain what they were doing, or they'll be like, like they'll tell a story, and what they did is not even important because the story's about someone else, but they want to talk about what they did. So that's sometimes a component of that Mars placement. Sometimes Mars in the fifth house. Fifth house is fun. It's lighthearted. It's not heavy energy. So, associated with dating, romance, hobbies, talents, self-creativity, also is linked to children. Anything that's kind of more lighthearted or makes us feel happy. And so when you have Mars here, this person wants to do things that make them feel happy, okay? And so, but they like to sometimes be physically active. So sometimes you'll see Mars in the fifth house. People, like, they always have to be doing something. They might be very competitive. And so it might depend on the sign, right? So like if you have like a very physical sign, you could have a person who's at least into sports or distance running, I don't know, something like that, right? Or you can have, if you like a Mars in Gemini or Mars in Aquarius or something more mental, this person might be competitive mentally. They might compete with things that require strategy in the mind. So that's why I say astrology, it's so good for you to get basic information. But remember, nothing's going to be as tailored to you as your own personal birth chart reading. Nothing's going to be tailored to you. Except for those you get in your actual chart interpreted. By interpreted, I mean, we can go online, but online is going to tell you the same thing it told me. If you're a Virgo like me, it's going to tell us the same thing. If your moon is Sag, like me, it's going to tell you the same thing. Whereas if you get an astrologer, a person to actually interpret it, now it's specific to you. You get what I'm saying? Instead of everybody who has the same placements getting the same thing, because there's limitations to what a computer can do. It's very helpful, but there's limitations there. All right, I'm 16 minutes in. I'm only on fifth house. All right, Mars and fifth house people, though, can sometimes get in trouble a little bit with their dating habits, because sometimes it tends to be like a lot of just like, they can be very, very flirtatious. They kind of go for what they want. But because Mars is kind of about action, there's not a lot of thought sometimes with that. So it's usually sometimes it's a pure physical type of thing, right? Like, oh, I like this person. It's not like they're not mentally connected to the person, or they're not emotionally connected to the person. So some people with Mars in the fifth house can experience those types of things where they're like overly flirtatious, especially in their youth, or overly, just dating everybody. Now, again, I am generalizing. But remember what Mars is about dominance. I want this. I'm going for this. Mars is also related to sexual energy. It is what it is. So that is sometimes can be the component of the Mars in the fifth house person. Now, again, you can grow and evolve over time, but because all aspects of our chart don't activate at the same time, right? There might be times in our life where we experience something more than others. Mars in the fifth house, I mean, although it sounds very, very, very like fun, also remember that Mars in the fifth house people can sometimes take things that are fun to the extreme, because Mars is about winning and conquering, right? So also that competitive streak can sometimes lead to being that type of person. I mean, even off cuff, it could be like a stage mom, stage dad, or what's it, field dad? I don't know what it's called. Like the dads who are like at the sports games and always trying to like, tell the coach what to do. So Mars, remember, children in the fifth house. You have Mars in the fifth house. Sometimes you can be very dominating over your children, because now we have Mars, which Mars wants to control. It's about, right, wherever it is. So now, okay, and so things that are fun can be considered like games, or like serious, or like conquering type of things to fifth house people, Mars fifth house people. So though it can be good when it means like you're kind of a person that's very, competitive and spicy and those types of things, you also might see like when it comes to children, this could be the person kind of imposes things on their children. Like, hey, you should play soccer. Hey, you should do this. Hey, you should do that. And it's like, it's not like a suggestion, it's an imposing. Like, that's why I said like the whole like, stage mom type of thing, or the dad that's on the field saying, no, put my kid in, why didn't you do better in your game? Like, it could be overbearing. So just watch that if that's your placement. Again, look at the whole sign, look at the whole chart. Mars in the sixth house. So Mars in sixth house people, work is very, very important to them. Their everyday life has to be busy, and they tend to do a lot of different things. They are the type of person that seems to not have it all down, but they do a lot. So they're typically not going to be lazy people. And if they are, they find a way to get things done either way. And so your Mars in the sixth house person, their day-to-day life is very, very filled with a lot of different things. But they need to control their day-to-day. So people Mars in the sixth house can be related to work environment. They need to be in a job where they're not being told what to do, or they have some type of freedom or independence, I guess I'm trying to say. Mars in the sixth house. Because sixth house is our day-to-day life. Work is also here, service, health, right? So when you have Mars here, right, this person is, remember, active, action, independence. Wherever Mars is, it wants to be independent. So when I put it in the sixth house, your day-to-day life, you need to feel that you are in control of your life. So you don't need to be in situations, or you're not going to like situations that tell you how to do things, when to do things. So you might want to pick a field, especially a job, because remember, your job is where you're at every day, what you're doing every day. So you want to pick something where you have some type of freedom. Now, you might have to collaborate and you might have to cooperate. I don't think you should say we all have to cooperate. Even if you're your own boss, you have to communicate and collaborate with other people in order to get things done. But the point is that Mars in the sixth house people tend to work very hard. But because of that, they like to do things on their own terms. Mars in the sixth house can also sometimes have conflicts with people in their day-to-day life because over how to do things, right? So Mercury rules this house. The sun rules the fifth house. The fourth house is ruled by the moon. So here where you have with the sixth house is ruled by Mercury. Not Mercury in the third, which was learning and communication. We're now doing the organization part. Mercury's second part, organization, analyzing, processing. That Virgo energy, sixth house. So now what you have going on right now is Mars has to function in a way that makes sense to them. Okay. And so sometimes it can be that conflict of like, even in like a work environment where Mars in the sixth house person is like, no, I'm doing it this way. Right. And this conflict with somebody else who wants to do it another way. But because Mars, wherever Mars is, it has to be like kind of like the authority, or it has to be a dominant. Wherever Mars is the area where we want to be the most independent. We think we know what direction we want to go in. And so that can be good and that can be bad. So that's something to watch out for, is Mars in sixth house people. But also something to watch out for is overworking yourself. So you're going to typically be a really hard worker because you're very independent, and people kind of might like that about you. Like, oh, this person's so independent, they don't need help. Or like they're very, enterprising, or whatever the case may be. But also working yourself so hard. This is the sixth house related to health, and in some aspects disease, right? So you want to make sure you're not overworking yourself because you want to get so much done, right? Because again, your Mars is now in a sign that's about work. So you're naturally going to say like, things have to get done. So just watch out for that. Mars in the seventh house. So Mars in the seventh house, people tend to go for the type of partnerships that they want. These are not the people who kind of sit around and wait for somebody to be interested in them. They kind of already know what they want. And because of that, they're able to go about getting that in a very specific manner. Mars in the seventh house people tend to kind of have a lot of passion, right? And so like even in the way in which they look at relationships, they kind of take that dominant of like, don't worry, like I'm going to lead this, or don't worry, like they don't mind putting a lot of effort into getting the partnership started. Now, again, seventh house is partnership, a lot of times related to romance, but also can be business partnerships. And it also can be just relating to people. So Mars in seventh house people can be really good with starting a relationship. And because of that, they get who they want, or they're in partnership with who they want. But sometimes that Mars wants independence. So they never quite want to gel with you all the way. They still want to be who they are. And they got to watch out, because sometimes it can feel like you're kind of like not an afterthought, but you're like just in the background, right? Like I'm the show here on Mars. You kind of, because Mars is about wherever they are, they want to be independent. Wherever Mars is dominant. So they also might be really good with being able to be there when someone needs them, because Mars gives you that confidence. So this is a person that will be there when you need them. Or if you're in a business partnership with them, you're Mars in the seventh house person, like they kind of going to take care of something. Something happens crazy. They're like, don't worry, I got it. I figured it out. So they might kind of be a leader in the partnership, but also sometimes they might take that to the extreme. Again, it depends on what sign it's in. If you have a Mars in Pisces seventh house, Mars in Virgo seventh house, maybe it's not as extreme. And though they might do that, it's more of a gentle approach. But if you have Mars and Cancer, 7th house, Mars and Cancer does not work well together. Cancer doesn't want to be in Mars. Mars don't want Cancer, okay? Because Cancer is about nurturing and about feeling and being okay with that intuitive feeling. But Mars is about action. It's not about all of that. So you do have to look at the particular sign in the house to see how this would work out. But again, I think they can be really good with, like, these people don't settle. Like, they kind of go for what they want when it comes to who they want in their life. They're not, some people just passively sit by and they wait for somebody to be interested in them. But that's not usually a Mars in 7th house person. Mars in the 8th house, just like Mars in the 1st house, it's a strong sign. It's strong because Mars rules the 8th house. Pluto also rules the 8th house. This has that Scorpio energy in it. All right, if you want to look at it like that. So 8th house Mars people tend to do really well with getting what they need. Here's why. 2nd house, self-sufficiency. 8th house, I'm now pulling with someone else. All right, I'm water. So water is always connected to other people. Get what I'm saying? Water is connected to other people. So because it's 8th house is joint assets. So again, intimacy, joint assets, rebirth, transformation, death, all that 8th house stuff. Mars in the 8th house, and you're now able to be successful because they're resourceful. Now, 2nd house has to build their own resources. 8th house can get from others. 8th house is linked to inheritance, joint assets. So the Mars in the 8th house person is really good at getting what they want, just like the Mars in the 1st house person. But the Mars in the 1st house person is showing more what they want. And it's more about themselves, showing themselves, projecting what they want. 8th house can do it more behind the scenes or more obscure. They're going to like look for opportunities but trust and believe. They're doing that same thing that Mars in the 1st house person is doing, but you just don't see it yet because Pluto rules the 8th house as well, right? So Mars in that 8th house has that influence there because yes, Mars is doing all of that work, but at the same time, it's like, how do I get what I want? Now, again, you have to look at the Mars sign to see how they're going to go with it, what their approach is. But Mars in the 8th house can be a great placement for people who accumulate. And they accumulate and they get what they want, not by just going forth. It's not really impulse. The 8th house is not about impulse. So now Mars kind of is a little bit subdued, right? But Mars is still going to get its way. But Mars can't show all its hands in the 8th house. So that's what we have. Now, what can happen with the Mars in the 8th house person? Sometimes becoming too consumed with how to get something. And sometimes you do have to be transparent with people about how you're getting something. But once you get to the 8th house, it now is a little bit more of that's hidden energy, this fixed energy that's under the scenes. And so it's behind the scenes type of energy. So what sometimes happens is it comes across as sneaky. So Mars in the 8th house does have to watch out for that potential for what they do to not always be transparent, for them to kind of, because sometimes you have to do stuff and not tell everybody what you're doing, but sometimes you also look a certain way when you're not forthcoming with people. So that is something that Mars people they're trying to get what they want, right? That fixed emotional, I want this and I'm going for this. But sometimes because their lack of transparency, it can come off as like being duplicitous, sneaky, lying, or something like that. But it can be a great placement for accumulating things because these people tend to go for what they want. Again, you look at the whole sign. Mars in the 9th house, people are expansive. Like they have to be doing something. So whereas you might have Mercury in the 9th house, this person is learning, learning and then dispensing it, right? Dispensing it. Meaning like when you learn something, you're not just sitting with it. When you go to 9th house, we're spreading awareness. We're telling people the truth. We're teaching people. See what I'm saying? We're speaking truth. Whereas the 3rd house is we're just learning. We're local. We're just immersing ourselves in the learning. So Mars here wants to act and wants to be independent. So this person is someone who might want to do their own. They might even feel like I have my own ideology. I'm going to share it with people. Mars is independent. Mars is aggressive. Wherever it is I want to be dominant. So there can be a dominance when it comes to indoctrinating people or beliefs and things like that because Mars is active. So this person could be more, I don't want to say aggressive. I can say like more determined than other people to share what they know. So the 9th house can be linked to religion and morality, spirituality to a certain extent, basically belief systems, because spirituality is technically more the 12th house and the water houses in general, but the 12th house especially. But 9th house is messaging, teaching, it's truth, whatever that truth may be. So Mars in the 9th house people tend to want to show that and do that. So they might live their truth. So where some people might just be talking about the truth and trying to tell us what to believe or think, then the Mars person does it. So if they believe in veganism, they're doing it. If they believe in a certain religion, they're doing it. If they believe in a certain cause, they're doing it. They're on the front lines doing it. So that's what you're going to see typically with the Mars in the ninth house person. Whatever that belief and ideology is, they do it. Now, the concern can be Mars brings conflict. Remember, Mars can be conflict. So when they're doing that, they have to watch out for trying to control other people's beliefs, other people's mindsets, other people's systems of understanding. There is a way you can help other people understand what you're saying, but Mars can come off very strong. All right. Mars in the 10th house. Mars in the 10th house. So Mars in the 10th house can be the person who really rises to the top. Now they do it through force a little bit. Like the other person that's like, I want this opportunity. I'm going for it. 10th house, earth energy, ruled by Saturn. Jupiter rules the 9th house. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. So 10th house is ruled by Saturn. So here we have an earth house, Capricorn energy. So here's about how do I get to the top so people can look at my status, and how do I build my career? 6th house is work. That's everyday life. Career is where we get to the 10th house. So now we're building up. Mars there is someone who has kind of found a way in. They're not going to take no for an answer. Your Mars in the 10th house people see opportunities, and they don't just sit and wait for somebody else to come to them. They tend to kind of go for those opportunities. They kind of say, like, this is what I want, and I'm going to achieve, and I'm going to attain that. So they have this kind of tenacity about themselves in how they see themselves. Usually have a high sense of self, high sense of importance or status, or they believe a lot in themselves. Now, Mars in the 10th house people tend to do really well in their career, but it's not because anyone gave them anything. It's because they kind of force their way in, or they kind of see what they want and they're like, I'm doing it. I don't need anyone else's approval. I'm going to this. I'm doing this. The sun in the 10th house person can kind of naturally kind of do that, right? Naturally kind of has that ability. Mars has to kind of like, I'm going for it. And even if other people might doubt you. So the thing with the Mars in the 10th house, remember 10th house is conflict. I'm going to tell you all the truth. I'm going to tell you the good and the bad. And so the good and the bad. So Mars in 10th sometimes feels that they have to kind of like fight others, not literally, but fight to get where they are, right? Because sometimes, remember, public image is associated with the 10th house. So it can be other people kind of feeling, or situations feeling that they're a barrier to getting to that point. And that's typically why the Mars in 10th house person like drives so hard, is because there can sometimes be some type of setback or something or someone in their way in which they have to kind of not prove them wrong, but they have to kind of go forth because it's an earth house. So Mars is directed here, and here Mars wants to be standing. At the end, they want to be standing. So they care a lot about their reputation and how they are perceived. So they're going to work through any difficulties that's thrown their way. But that is sometimes something that comes up in the 10th with the Mars and 10th house person. All right. Now, 11th house is the house associated with friendship, hopes, dreams, forward thinking, group associations. If you're a person that belongs to a lot of organizations or clubs, or even if you're younger, or teams, or some type of get together that, crew that you have, that is 11th house energy. The 11th house is ruled by Uranus and Saturn. So it has like Aquarius energy to it. When Mars is there, typically this person is kind of really direct and usually very much a presence within any group dynamic they have. They kind of stand out. People might look to them to be leaders. People might kind of push that kind of identity on them. And I don't think, not push it on them to the point where a person doesn't have free will, but kind of like look at them as like a leader, because wherever Mars is, it wants to be independent and also is kind of forceful and dominant. So we put it in the 11th house as a person who can sometimes navigate organizations and navigate things very well. This might be a good placement for someone who wants to be at the top of a certain group or organization that they belong to, because they have the ability to get others around them, rally others around them. Okay. Mars kind of sometimes does want things their way. So this is typically, especially if you have Mars in like an air sign or a fire sign in this house, they're probably very vocal about what they think and what they believe and what they're passionate about. Mars in 11th house people sometimes take on a lot. So sometimes they think that they can kind of solve the problems of their friends, or they might do a lot for other people in their groups or in their, people that are in their inner circle. Okay. And because of that, these Mars and 11th house people, they kind of always have to be involved in something bigger than themselves. They like being a part of something, especially even better if they can kind of run it. Or they can be in charge of it. So this might be a great placement for someone who wants to start an organization or start some type of group or some type of any type of dynamic where other people have to be involved, or cause that involves other people, because they have that kind of spirit of let's try this, let's do this very directive spirit, not very passive. And so a lot of times Mars in the 11th house people can do really well. They need to be a part of something bigger than themselves, but at the same time, they want direction, and especially if they're Mars in a cardinal sign, right? So that can be a placement for people who are really good when it comes to being in charge of a group, in charge of others, someone that is kind of chosen to lead. But because of that, sometimes there can be, because there's always this focus on doing and action and things like that, sometimes other things can be ignored, right? So Mars in the 11th house person is trying to do something bigger than themselves. It's always about something bigger. It's always about the message. It's always about something that is, going to impact others. Remember, this is the house that's also associated with forward thinking, right? So Mars it's an air house. So now Mars is in the air house. So Mars has to learn how to kind of navigate that planning or that bigger picture thinking process. And so sometimes with Mars, when they do that, they're still inhibited by this need to act and not really know and think and plan about how does that impact what other people want. So Mars can be great when it comes to action and other people, and having really an understanding of what needs to be done. This is Mars, we're going to do this. This can help everybody type of energy, but also realizing that you have to sometimes take a step back and listen to other people. Even if you're chosen to lead, you need to make sure that you also listen every once in a while to what other people truly need, because your focus is going to be so much on doing that you must sometimes forget the planning and the mindset and the communication part of it. Mars in the 12th house. All right, so Mars in the 12th house. Okay, I have a video about Mars in the 12th house. So here's the difference now. I've said that Mars can be an area of conflict wherever it is, right? Now here's the difference. The 12th house is hidden, the unconscious. It is collective consciousness. It is, karma, spirituality, hidden enemies, self-undoing. But it also is a great opportunity for tapping into creativity and imagination, because these people can have their own world. So people with 12th house placements can sometimes create their own world. And in that world, there's usually a lot of imagination, spirituality. Some get in touch with things that are outside reality, our reality, right? Psychic things and things of that nature. So when Mars is there, though, it presents more of an opportunity for inner conflict, because the 12th house is a very internalized, it's probably the most internalized house in the whole entire zodiac. It is. It's internalized, and it's very introspective, and it's very introverted. This is very sensitive energy, because here's where we go to retreat. Right? The 6th house is where we go to work. We're busy. The 12th house is where we go to retreat, to relax, to do what we really want to do. But sometimes because what we want to do, Mars wants to act, but Mars is in the 12th house. So now it's got all these things it wants to do behind the scenes, and they get such vivid imaginations and vivid ideas of what they want to do. But sometimes the problem is transferring that energy into the waking world. What is it that you truly do? Okay, how do you put all those ideas and things, or even sometimes things they're doing behind the scenes for themselves, but how do you put that out here, right? And so Mars in the 12th house struggles a lot with activating their thoughts, imagination, activating their drive and bringing it to the forefront, because Mars is about action, but now it's trapped in this 12th house. So now it's an overdrive, but what is it doing? It's creating all of these longings. It can create a lot of longing, a lot of things you want to do. It can create a lot of things you do in secret, but you don't bring it to the forefront, because 12th house can make you kind of sometimes you don't see clearly, because you're trapped in this esoteric type of energy with this 12th house. And Mars wants to act. So yes, Mars and 12th house people, you have a lot of work to do and look at my videos, because I have a video about Mars in the 12th house. I have a video about the 12th house too. Mars is a lot of energy that is kind of just waiting to be expressed there. It's kind of relaxed. So now we don't have Mars doing what it really wants to do, which is move. So that's why sometimes these people can lack energy. Sometimes they struggle to do certain things. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, I do suggest you watch my video. I'll link it, Mars in the 12th house. And I also have a Mars in the 12th house stellium video coming soon. And the biggest thing though, the good thing about these people is they work really well behind the scenes. So when you allow them to do things at their own pace, 12th house energy, Pisces energy, Neptune ruled, Neptune, when you allow them to do something they envision, when you allow them to do something they've dreamed up, when you allow them to go forth with their vision, they tend to do a really good job because Mars has spent so much time in a house that's very internalized. So instead of being really bothered by the outside world and what other people think and want, they spend so much time perfecting what they do, right? That's why I say a lot of these people can have really great talents but not use them. So that's a really good, just segue to like really understand that 12th house energy can be used. I tell people this all the time. It's a lot of fear mongering about the 12th house. Can be a difficult house because every other house somewhat, even some of the other water houses, it's about what you do or interacting with others, or it's about what people can see. The 12th house is not what you can see. It is what you literally feel. It is what you literally create. It is the most disconnected from reality house, but it also is connected to the esoteric, right? It's directly connected to spirituality. So when people learn more about those things and learn more about themselves, we typically can now override those feelings of being lost and confused that can sometimes happen in the 12th house, because the 12th house is where we go to relax. It's where we go to kind of relax from the harsh world. And so you don't want to become so trapped in that complacency though, because though it's good to relax sometimes, it can cause you to be inactive. So Mars and 12th house people, we have to learn how to be more active. Do whatever we're doing behind the scenes, we can kind of bring that to the forefront, right? Doesn't mean we have to reveal everything about ourselves, but it does mean that don't get stuck. All those good ideas you have and all those things that you do on your own, what of that can you then give to the world, give to others? Because the 12th house and the 6th house is about giving in some way. One's spiritual, one's more the actual work ethic and the tasks associated with giving back to others. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, please, if you got to the end of this video or you're Mars in 12th house, look at the Mars in 12th house video that I have just for that. And also look at your Mars sign in order to really see how all this really fits together for you.